Air raid sirens and explosions? Every day in Russia starts the same way. Kyiv has proposed an airport truce to Moscow, but will Putin agree? Negotiations with the Russian Federation are reaching a new level. Europe has decided to intervene directly.
Ministers are already discussing a list of concessions they will demand from Moscow for the sake of saving European security.
Fear of sanctions or friendship with Putin? India has taken an unexpected step.
New Delhi has kicked Russian gas off its market. Tankers with gas are currently drifting in the ocean.
A real nightmare for the Kremlin. Ukraine and Germany are creating drones that can reach Moscow.
Germany and Ukraine are launching joint production of drones with a flight range of up to 1,500 kilometers.
Missiles made especially for Lukashenko. Has Belarus really decided to create its own Oreshnik?
Not only organizing already existing and deployed serious systems, but also developing new types, missiles, munitions.
Did someone order a luxury taxi? The bunker man himself came to pick up his teacher. A new episode of the Kremlin's production. Putin came out to the people, but is it really that simple?
Hello, it's me, Volodymyr Rabchin, and this is Ukraine Today. Please subscribe, leave a like, and let's move on to the news. Let's start with the drones in Orenburg, Russia. There were communication problems there, and the local airport implemented the carpet plan. It was neither receiving nor sending flights. There are also reports of an attack on Orsk-nefte-org-sintez in Orsk and explosions in Chelyabinsk. The information is being clarified. The occupiers have started installing so-called mangles on their Grakonok boats. This happened after a series of precise strikes by the defense forces on temporarily occupied Crimea. These metal structures are supposed to protect the boats from Ukrainian FPVs. And what about naval drones? The Russian invaders' spring offensive has stalled. According to the New York Times, these are the slowest rates of advance by the occupiers on the front in the past 3 years. More details on this in the report.
The Russian offensive has stalled. According to analysts from the New York Times, the pace of the occupiers' advance this spring has dropped to its lowest level since 2023.
They are no longer able to launch offensives on the same scale as before, but they still need to show results regularly.
As a result, we see these kinds of reckless actions by the Russian command. In the settlement of Rodninskaya, the Russian General Staff concentrated a large assault unit, which was supposed to deliver that very result. But it was the Ukrainian armed forces who delivered the result, using aerial bombs to level the buildings along with the soldiers inside.
Naturally, nothing was left of the enemy. The entire unit, likely up to several dozen people, was buried under the rubble. And this was done precisely thanks to the additional power. So, what kind of bombs were these? Definitely not 125, as I said, but possibly at least 250 kilograms, or even more. Maybe even half a ton.
On one of the main approaches to Sloviansk, Putin's troops also made themselves known. Yes, they went on the assault riding motorcycles, hoping to slip through the kill zone.
Gathering a column of 16 motorcycles, Putin's troops moved forward to quickly cross the gray zone and launch an assault. But the drones of the 81st Airmobile Brigade were ready for the attack. Moreover, adjacent units immediately came to their aid. This is the advantage of drone-based defense. You can provide support from a distance. There's no need to transport infantry or expose certain positions on the front line. As a result, according to the brigade commander's report, all the motorcycles were destroyed and the soldiers were killed.
At the same time, even a distance of 150 kilometers is no longer safe for the occupiers. Rear. As analysts report, the Ukrainian armed forces are now focused on destroying Russian reserves and stockpiles up to 150 kilometers deep, which significantly reduces the potential of frontline units.
All these attacks on logistics have bled the Russian army dry and continue to destroy it. Power right in the rear. This is one of the main, if not the most important reasons for the failure of Putin's troops' offensive in 2026. By the way,
for many, the final straw was Putin's parade on May 9th, when not a single piece of equipment appeared on Red Square. And all the achievements of the Russian military-industrial complex could only be shown in a video clip. The question of the greatness of the world's second army resolved itself.
Putin said that right now equipment is very much needed at the front in order to finish the so-called special military operation as soon as possible. That is even for someone not in the know. An observer watching the broadcast of this event is left with the distinct and overwhelming impression that there is such a critically small amount of military equipment available, and it is so desperately needed and vital for the front lines. that they simply cannot afford to send even a few dozen, or perhaps even fewer units to be displayed on Red Square.
At the same time, a crucial role in the near-total halt of the Russian offensive was played by a new approach from the Ukrainian command. The new core system of the Ukrainian armed forces proposed by Minister Fedorov, as well as the long-range strikes by the head of the unmanned systems forces, Madhyar, have shown phenomenal results both on the battlefield and in the Russian rear.
The unmanned systems forces continue their fundamental struggle against Russian air defense. Why is it fundamental? Because destroying air defense systems in the frontline zone then allows for relatively free attacks on logistics and various important targets such as warehouses, headquarters, and military bases.
It seems that the Russian Federation, by the 5th year of the war, is only losing momentum. This has become clear even in the Kremlin. Moscow does not know how to solve this problem. After all, even Putin, respectfully referring to Zelensky as Mr., is now cautiously talking about a ceasefire.
It is quite possible that this decline is being acknowledged in Russia because the Institute for the Study of War has repeatedly noted that Russian units lacking the ability to take some small Ukrainian village, so we're talking about villages here, not cities, but villages. They started publishing the Russian side is publishing videos generated by artificial intelligence, supposedly showing Ukrainian soldiers surrendering en masse. In the same way, they spread videos claiming that the Russian flag has supposedly been placed somewhere, even though in reality it isn't there.
At the same time, Moscow continues to publicly insist on the withdrawal of the defense forces from the territory of Donbass. By the way, according to Western experts' calculations, if Russia continues its offensive at the same pace, it would take them 30 years to capture the entire Donetsk region.
In the past 24 hours, Russia has lost at least 1,020 invaders, killed and wounded. Thus, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, this brings the total to 1,343,050 occupiers. In addition, over the past 24 hours, Ukraine's defense forces have destroyed 2 Russian tanks, 2 armored combat vehicles, 72 artillery systems, and dozens of other pieces of Russian military equipment. Meanwhile, the flow of social problems seems to have overloaded the Russian sewage system. Maybe the sharp stench and rivers of filth will help Russians realize that it's time to end the war?
While Russian propaganda keeps droning on about the greatness of a superpower, Russia itself is literally drowning in its own problems. And right now, we're not even talking about the front lines.
Pallets have been laid out in the yard, starting from the entrance all the way to the hospital. This is how people walk. Look, the flower bed is flooded, and there's a girl covering her nose because of the smell.
This is the city of Engels in the Saratov region. It is from here that Russian bombers regularly take off to launch missiles at Ukrainian cities at night. Now the city is drowning in its own sewage.
The local playground, the wooden benches, and the small sandboxes are all still holding out quite well.
A major accident at the main sewer collector has turned the streets into stinking rivers and fecal shores. Yards, basements, and even the lower floors of residential buildings are flooded with excrement. And
this is how we have to walk to kindergarten with small children. It's impossible to get to school at all. I mean, what kind of conditions are these?
The water keeps rising. The first step is almost covered. It's reached the first step. I'm trying to go outside. This is what the yard looks like. Here are my flowers blooming. There. Everything is flooded.
More than 200,000 people were left without water right during the May holidays. The authorities declared a state of emergency. Rospotrebnadzor recommended that Russians drink only bottled or boiled water. As usual, at first the utility services tried to pretend that everything was under control, but after heavy rains, the system completely collapsed. Now utility workers are asking residents not to use toilets and sinks unless absolutely necessary, because without water pressure, waste just accumulates in the pipes.
Just yesterday I actually wrote down I want to poop, but I simply cannot do it.
Meanwhile, even without the help of the Ukrainian armed forces, Russia's infrastructure continues to burn. This time, one of Russia's largest metallurgical plants, Sevastol in Cherepovets, caught fire. The fire covered an area of about 300 square meters, and thick columns of smoke could be seen from almost every district of the city. However, of course, there is no threat and the situation is under control, as the Russian authorities traditionally stated. However, it was barrels of benzene and industrial oils that were burning. Meanwhile, in Tuapse, the smell of stability can still be felt to this day.
One should not assume that when a fire ends, its impact on people and nature also ends. No, it continues because all these toxic substances remain in the environment. They migrate and one way or another end up in the human body.
After the fire, elevated concentrations of benzene continue to be detected in the air. Local residents are advised not to open their windows, to go outside less often, to wear masks, to rinse their eyes, and even to avoid using contact lenses.
A slight exceedance of hygienic standards for the maximum one-time concentration of benzene in the air has been recorded. The level of pollution is generally lower than it was during the extinguishing of the previous large-scale fire, which started on the night of April 20th due to a drone attack. Operational headquarters, Krasnodar Krai.
In fact, the situation poses a threat to people's health and evacuation is required in the city.
In this case, there is an extremely large amount of such substances. They are especially dangerous for those who have diseases related to the respiratory system. For example, bronchitis or asthma. Benzene is a first-class carcinogen. It can provoke some type of cancer, such as leukemia.
A similar situation is developing today in other Russian regions as well. In the Perm Krai, after a fire at an industrial site, Rospotrebnadzor also did not detect any exceedances, even though the same kind of oil rain fell there as in Tuapse. In Ijevsk, they have their own kind of environmental stability. Locals have been complaining for years about the reddish dust settling on the snow near the brick and expanded clay factory. Previous inspections have already recorded this, an excess of harmful substances.
But it seems that Putin's inner circle doesn't care much about this. After all, they don't have to breathe this air. In all three cases, the Russian authorities keep insisting that the situation is under control and there is no threat to the population. Even though local residents complain about the acrid smell, breathing problems, polluted air, and the consequences that could affect people's health for a long time to come,
I was just talking about this recently. We will press them, and there is reason to believe that we will finish them off. And
while the Kremlin spends billions on war and missiles, its own cities are drowning in filth, suffocating from benzene, and living next to failing infrastructure. So the Putin system knows how to kill its own citizens, not only in a shameful war, but also with its so-called stability.
Now is the perfect time to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it. Please do it right now. Thank you, and glory to Ukraine against the backdrop of colossal losses. Amid economic and social problems, Putin started talking about peace. A reasonable question immediately arises. What the hell was that? Because it really doesn't seem like the Kremlin understands how to wind down its so-called special military operation.
The war needs to be ended, and it's possible to meet with Mr. Zelensky. An unexpected metamorphosis has happened to Putin.
everything is going according to plan.
We don't know if Ukraine's strikes deep inside Russia have influenced the bunker dweller, or maybe he just overheated on Red Square on May 9th, but he started talking about ending the war, and soon at that.
I think that things are moving toward an end.
Of course, not without the usual. He couldn't resist the usual. They wanted to destroy Russia, but now Putin has even found some smart people in the West.
There are certainly smart people there.
And most importantly, Zelensky is now addressed as Mr., and Putin is ready to meet with him not only in Moscow.
The Ukrainian side, Mr. Zelensky, is ready to hold a personal meeting. Yes, I have heard that. But this is not the first time we've heard it. Well, what can I say about this? We've never refused. I have not refused. I'm not the one proposing this meeting, but if someone is proposing it, by all means, let the one who wants to meet come. Let them come to Moscow and we will meet. We can also meet in a third country, but only in that case. Once the definitive and binding agreements have finally been successfully reached on a peace treaty.
Of course, ultimatums remain, but it's hard not to notice the changes. But why did Putin suddenly decide to change something?
Putin probably hasn't developed any more affection for Zelensky lately, in fact, quite the opposite. Well, basically, it's clear that Russia is suffering defeat on all fronts, and that Russia has failed to handle this war. Accordingly, what's happening now is simply an awareness and acknowledgement of all this. And that's why now the only thing Russia is really trying to do is to somehow save face. And
all this is happening against the backdrop of the Dossier Center publishing the Kremlin's plan for ending the war, a set of instructions on how to sell this not quite victory to the Russian people.
This is a victory over international imperialism and globalism, not over Ukrainian nationalism, but over the United West.
Kremlin talking heads have already started working according to the new guidelines.
Look, the Sergei Markov channel, the great political scientist, I used to sit with him in neighboring offices at Channel 1. So Russia has already won. This is already a victory. We have fought against all the Western countries. Russia is not broken, and so on, similar talking points. Then it continues almost like a carbon copy. The Channel 2 majors, one of the largest Z-publics, is said to be close to the Ministry of Defense and Company, to Belousov, and therefore to Katerina Tikhonova, Putin's daughter. So Russia also thwarted the plans to destroy the country, which means it has already won strategically. In
the presentation of the image of victory, the Kremlin also promises a bright future for Mother Russia. They also predict a world where all enemies are either destroyed or powerless.
Ukraine will not exist after the war ends anyway. The country will disappear within 10 to 15 years. The European Union has proven its helplessness and is stagnating. Most of the world has supported Russia, and only traitors have left the country. In such a situation, you need to know when to stop in time. Now the airports will start operating again. Sanctions will be lifted. Russian weapons will be exported since they have proven their reliability.
Interestingly, the Kremlin understands that not everyone will swallow such a victory, so they decided to label anyone who downplays these achievements as anti-patriots of Russia. And true patriots are being encouraged to focus on the following.
We present the war not as something unfinished, but as having achieved key objectives. The key objectives were as follows. Russia, let me repeat, I am reading from this plan. These are not my own words. Russia saved Donbass, Russia secured a land corridor to Crimea and seized important territories and resources. And it doesn't matter what is actually happening in those territories. Well, for example, agricultural activity is now impossible. It strengthened its sovereignty, and most importantly, as they write, this is really the cherry on top. Russia withstood a war against the collective West, made up of 50 countries that fought against dear Russia.
But ending the war, which Putin suddenly started talking about and which the more liberal Kremlin faction dreams of, is just one possible scenario. After all, alongside the camp in the Kremlin that wants to end the war as soon as possible, there are also those who want to fight to the bitter end. At the same press conference where Putin spoke about ending the special military operation, he also voiced support for the pro-war camp.
The armed forces must focus their attention on the final defeat of the enemy within the framework of the special military operation.
Let's be honest, there's nothing peaceful about this attitude.
When a country is run by an old schizophrenic, it's pretty hard to predict anything with 100% certainty, because really, who knows what will get into his head next.
However, there is also a third option. All these statements could be a bluff. Analysts at the Institute for the Study of War are convinced that, in reality, no one in the Kremlin wants peace. They say that Putin and his cronies are pretending to seek peace in order to ease tensions caused by Ukraine's long-range strikes on Russia and other problems.
The Kremlin is likely trying to appease its domestic audience, which is increasingly feeling the consequences of more than 4 years of war and Russia's inability to repel Ukraine's long-range strikes.
Therefore, all the current talk of peace in the Kremlin should be seen not as a change of course, but as yet another stage in their game. Because while some Kremlin factions are scripting a victory, others are once again calling to finish off the enemies.
Kyiv offered Moscow to extend the partial ceasefire after May 11th. But last night, Russia launched more than 200 drones. This was reported by Ukraine's Deputy Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha. According to him, Putin's repeated rejection of the peace proposal should have consequences for him. Ukraine has begun preparing a drone deal agreement with Canada, President Zelensky announced. According to him, 20 countries are already in negotiations to receive Ukrainian drones. Agreements have already been reached with some countries, and contracts with manufacturers will follow. The EU may begin accession talks with Ukraine as early as this summer, according to European Commissioner Marta Kos. She added that Ukraine could receive the first payments from the 90 billion loan as early as next week. If US policy toward Russia and Ukraine does not align with Europe's interests, the allies should initiate their own dialogue with Russia. This was stated by Finnish President Alexander Stubb in an interview with Karriere DSR. According to him, European leaders are currently discussing who exactly should establish contact, whether it should be a special representative or a group of leaders. At the end of May, the EU's top diplomats will discuss in Cyprus the advisability of potential negotiations and the demands that should be presented to Moscow. a European blow to Russia's core values. The 21st package of EU sanctions will become one of the most extensive thanks to the loss of power. By Viktor Orban. This is reported by Politico. Brussels plans to expand restrictions on the so-called shadow fleet, banks, and the Russian military-industrial complex. Vladimir Gundyaev, also known as Patriarch Kirill, may also be included on the sanctions list. All the details are coming up next.
The chief propagandist of the Russian world, one of President Vladimir Putin's closest confidants, Patriarch Kirill of Moscow and all Russia, is now in the crosshairs of the European Union. After Viktor Orban's defeat in the Hungarian elections, the European Union received the green light to increase pressure on Russia, which had previously been blocked by Budapest. According to Politico, citing sources in diplomatic circles, work has already begun in Brussels on the 21st package of sanctions, which is planned to be agreed upon by midsummer.
It is important to understand that Viktor Orban played the role of a sort of representative of Russia in the European Union and was the person through whom a huge number of initiatives related to the imposition of sanctions were blocked. And this is not speculation. This is information that surfaced before the elections in Hungary when it was, let's say, not exactly presented, but rather a large amount of evidence was demonstrated, most importantly, intercepted conversations involving Hungary's top leadership, including Foreign Minister Szijjártó, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, and other officials.
One of the key innovations should be personal sanctions against the top officials. Hungary is no longer a country that, let's say, will simply do whatever is expected of it. Instead, it has evolved into a nation that firmly prioritizes its own sovereign interests and national identity. It no longer feels compelled to follow every demand from the international community, choosing instead to forge an independent path that focuses on what is best for its own people and its own future.
What Russia asks? And most importantly, as Matter says, Hungary will not block initiatives that arise in the GIEs. One of these initiatives is the initiative concerning the Russian Orthodox Church, since there is already a huge amount of evidence that the Russian Orthodox Church is not, let's say, a religious organization, but rather a subdivision of the Russian FSB, and it should be treated as such.
Patriarch Kirill has faithfully and loyally served the dictator for many years. He has turned Russian Orthodoxy into a political and religious machine of the Kremlin and personally blessed the war and the army for mass killings and destruction. The topic of war has become the main theme in the Patriarch's sermons.
I would ask all of you to join this prayer so that the Lord may bless the Russian land. Whenever I use the term, and truly mean Russian, I am referring to the ancient land of Rus, which is the historical foundation from which the great Russians originally came. And Ukrainians, Little Russians and other peoples, but that very Russes with which we are all historically connected.
The EU is also preparing a strike against the logistical schemes of Russian oil exports. The tightening of sanctions against violator tankers aims to cut off the flow of foreign currency that fuels the war machine. In Europe, they hope that budget depletion will force Putin to soften his stance and abandon unrealistic demands at the upcoming negotiations.
A very important point is that the sanctions are not stopping. In Russia, their propaganda constantly says, look, just a little longer, and Ukraine will stop resisting just a little longer, and there will be no new sanctions just a little longer, and the sanctions will be lifted. But what is really happening? Ukraine continues to resist, and the European Union, just as it was imposing sanctions, continues to do so. The main thing is that they are sending a clear signal that we will continue to do this, and we are not going to lift them.
The new package of sanctions will also target tankers from Russia's shadow fleet, Russian banks, financial institutions, military-industrial companies, and firms selling stolen Ukrainian grain.
And now this is yet another signal to Russia. Don't think that the sanctions will be lifted in the near future. On the contrary, more will be added soon. And yes, maybe this won't have a fatal effect on your economy, but it will push it even closer to a very difficult situation. A recession can already be stated as a fact. And now there is only one question. Will this recession turn into a depression or not? Right now, all these statements about sanctions are exactly the kind of statements that push things forward. They are pushing the trajectory of the Russian economy from recession toward depression.
In Brussels, they've only just started working on the 21st package of sanctions, so right now the ministers are just throwing out initial ideas. According to the plan, everything should be ready and approved sometime in June or early July.
On to other topics. The scandalous interview of former press secretary to President Zelensky, Yulia Mendel, with American conservative commentator Tucker Carlson. Ms. Mendel, in particular, told her counterpart that Ukraine is in decline and that Zelensky is supposedly not very constructive due to mental health issues. Overall, there were a lot of statements that for some reason echoed Kremlin narratives. I assume that this story will soon have further developments. We are keeping an eye on how the situation unfolds. And finally, a word about the power of song today. On May 12th, there will be the first semi-final of the anniversary Eurovision 2026. This year, the contest is being held in Austria. Ukraine is represented by the singer Lelika with the song Ridnim. She will perform on May 14th in the second semi-final. Bookmakers predict that the Ukrainian singer will place in the top 10 finalists. We are rooting for her and showing our support. And that's all for today. Thank you for watching. Strength to the Ukrainian defenders, both men and women. Glory to Ukraine. Subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share this video. See you next time.